I'm Eleanor Whitmore, 71 years old. At my grandson's 10th birthday dinner, I sat at the head of my own dining table, smiling politely while my daughter-in-law Catherine spoke rapid French to her mother sitting beside her. They thought I couldn't understand a single word. But I heard every syllable. Every insult. Every cruel plot they were weaving about my future. La vie salope senile pense encore tu elle dirige les choses, Catherine said with a laugh. The senile old bitch still thinks she's running things. Nous la ferons déclarer inapte d'ici Thanksgiving et la maison de ville sera à nous d'ici Noël. We'll have her declared incompetent by Thanksgiving and the brownstone will be ours by Christmas. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I spent 23 years living in Paris. I spoke French before Catherine was even born. And what I did with that information would destroy everything they'd been planning. But before we continue, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments where you're watching this video from. We love to know how far our stories reach. I need to tell you something about myself that most people don't know. When people look at me now, they see a typical American grandmother. Someone who's lived her entire life in Brooklyn, never venturing far from home, speaking only English, living a simple, provincial existence. That's exactly what I want them to see. But it's a lie. A carefully constructed performance that I've been maintaining for the past 15 years, ever since my husband Richard died. The truth is, I'm not who my family thinks I am. From 1975 to 1998, I lived in Paris. Not as a tourist. Not for a year abroad. For 23 years. Richard was an international art dealer, and I was a curator, first at a small gallery in the Marais, then at progressively larger institutions. By the time we left Paris, I was senior curator at one of the most prestigious private galleries in Europe. We had an apartment on Rue de Rivoli with views of the Tuileries garden. We spoke French at home more often than English. We had French friends, French habits, French lives. I was more Parisian than some people born in Paris. The art world in Paris in those years was intoxicating. I worked with pieces by Monet, Renoir, Matisse. I authenticated paintings, curated exhibitions, wrote catalogue essays in French for French publications. I negotiated with collectors in flawless French. I gave lectures at the Sorbonne. I was somebody in that world. Not Eleanor the American. Eleanor the curator. Eleanor who understood Impressionism and Post-Impressionism better than most scholars. Eleanor who could look at a painting and tell you not just who painted it, but when, under what circumstances, what the artist was feeling, what they were trying to say. Richard and I were happy there. Deeply, profoundly happy. We'd have coffee at our local cafe every morning, the owner greeting us in rapid French, us responding in kind. We'd spend Sundays at museums or walking along the Seine. We'd host dinner parties where French intellectuals would debate art theory until 2 in the morning while I served cheese and wine and contributed my own thoughts in French that flowed as naturally as breathing. But then Richard got sick. Pancreatic cancer. It was fast and it was brutal. 6 months from diagnosis to death, and most of that time he was in too much pain to do anything but lie in our apartment overlooking the gardens, holding my hand, asking me to read to him in French because it soothed him. When he died, I couldn't stay. Every corner of Paris reminded me of him. Every cafe, every gallery, every street corner where we'd kissed or laughed or argued about some artist's technique. I sold the apartment, packed up our life, and came back to Brooklyn where I'd grown up, where my son James and his family lived. I bought the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with money from the Paris apartment sale. A beautiful historic building worth about $8 million, though I've never told anyone the exact value. I also brought back Richard's and my art collection, worth another $6 million at least. Paintings we'd acquired over decades, pieces we'd fallen in love with, investments that had appreciated far beyond what we'd paid. And I had about 4 million in various accounts, investments, savings from years of well-paid work in the art world. My son James knew I lived in Paris, of course. But he was only 6 when we moved there, and we brought him back to the States for college. After that, he visited maybe once a year, usually for just a few days. He never really understood what our life there was like. Never understood that his mother was a respected professional, that she spoke French fluently, that she moved in sophisticated circles. To him, I was just mom who happened to live in France for a while. When I moved back after Richard died, he seemed almost relieved, like I was finally being normal again, finally being the regular American mother he'd always wanted me to be. And I let him think that. I was grieving. I was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to maintain my old identity. So I became the grandmother. I focused on my grandson Maxwell, who was just a baby when I moved back. I baked cookies. I babysat. I wore comfortable clothes instead of the designer pieces I'd worn in Paris. I stopped speaking French except occasionally to myself when I was alone. I let everyone assume I'd just been a housewife in Paris, following Richard around while he did the important work. It was easier that way. Less complicated. And honestly, after Richard died, I didn't care about impressing anyone anymore. I didn't care if people thought I was impressive or sophisticated or intelligent. I just wanted to be left alone with my grief and my memories and my grandson. But then, 7 years ago, James married Catherine. I should have known from the moment I met her that she was going to be a problem. The wedding was small, quick, almost rushed. James had been dating her for less than a year when he announced they were engaged. He seemed nervous when he introduced us, like he was afraid I wouldn't approve. And I remember thinking that was odd because James had never sought my approval before. He'd always been confident, almost arrogant, secure in his choices. Catherine was beautiful in that very deliberate way some women are. Every hair in place, makeup perfect, clothes expensive and tasteful. She was 31 at the time to James's 38, and she had this aura of sophistication that she wore like armor. Within 5 minutes of meeting me, she dropped 3 French phrases into the conversation. Just casual little things, like c'est la vie and joie de vivre, but said with what she clearly thought was a perfect French accent. "Oh, you speak French?" I asked, keeping my voice pleasant and interested. Her eyes lit up. "Yes, I spent 2 years in France. I'm practically fluent. I studied at the Sorbonne actually." The way she said it, you could hear the pride, the sense that this made her special, cultured, better than the average American. "How wonderful," I replied. And I left it at that. I didn't mention my own history. Some instinct told me to keep that information to myself. Over the following months, as she and James planned their wedding and I got to know her better, I started to understand why that instinct had been right. Catherine used her French like a weapon. She dropped French phrases constantly, usually when she wanted to make someone feel inferior or excluded. She'd see something and declare it très chic or formidable, with an air of authority that suggested she was the arbiter of good taste. She'd mention her time in France constantly, as if 2 years living abroad made her an expert on European culture. And she brought her mother Margot to everything. Every family dinner, every holiday, every birthday party. Margot was a thin, severe-looking woman in her 60s who spoke English with a heavy French accent. Catherine introduced her as being from a very old French family, and Margot would nod and say something in French that Catherine would translate for the rest of us with barely concealed condescension. But I speak French. And I know a Quebec accent when I hear one. Margot wasn't from France. She was French-Canadian, probably from Montreal or Quebec City. Her French was grammatically correct but the accent was distinctly North American, not European. And some of the phrases she used were Québécois rather than Parisian. Little things that most Americans wouldn't catch, but that I heard immediately. I didn't say anything though. I just watched and listened. And what I saw was that Catherine was building an entire identity around being sophisticated and European and cultured. She'd talk about how Americans were so provincial, so unsophisticated compared to Europeans. She'd criticize James's tastes, his clothes, his friends, always with this air of being more refined than everyone around her. And James was changing. My confident, somewhat arrogant son was becoming uncertain, always looking to Catherine for approval. He started using French phrases too, badly pronounced, like a tourist trying to fit in. He started dressing differently, buying expensive clothes that Catherine picked out. He started talking about culture and art and sophistication in ways that sounded like he was parroting things Catherine had told him. It hurt to watch. But I told myself it was his life, his choice, his marriage. I kept quiet. I played the simple grandmother. I smiled and nodded when Catherine spoke French to her mother at family dinners, excluding everyone else from the conversation. I pretended not to notice when they'd laugh about something in French and everyone else at the table would sit there feeling awkward and left out. The comments started small. Little things that could almost be dismissed as innocent observations. Eleanor, vous avez l'air fatigué, Catherine would say at dinner. You look tired. But the way she said it suggested not concern but criticism, like being tired was a failure on my part. Or she'd look around my brownstone and say to Margot in French, C'est dommage tu n'es sache pas vraiment comment décorer. It's a shame she doesn't really know how to decorate. Right in front of me, assuming I couldn't understand. I'd smile blandly and ask if anyone wanted more coffee. The insults escalated slowly over the years. By Maxwell's 5th birthday, Catherine was regularly speaking French to her mother about me at family gatherings. She'd comment on my clothes, regard comment ls habile, comme un vieil paysan. Look how she dresses, like an old peasant woman. She'd talk about my cooking, la nourriture est si simple, si américaine, si sans raffinement. The food is so simple, so American, so without refinement. She'd discuss my brownstone, cette maison est gaspillée pour elle n'a aucune idée de ses valeurs. This house is wasted on her, she has no idea of its value. That last comment started appearing more and more frequently. The house. My brownstone. Catherine was obsessed with it. She'd walk through the rooms with this appraising look, touching things, measuring with her eyes. She'd mention to James, in English so I could hear, how much brownstones in Brooklyn Heights were worth, how much space I had, how much house for just one person. Mother should really think about downsizing, she'd say to James in front of me. This is too much house for an elderly woman living alone. What if she falls on the stairs? What if she has a medical emergency and no one finds her for days? It's not safe. James would nod, his face troubled. Mom, Catherine has a point. Have you thought about maybe moving somewhere smaller? Somewhere with less maintenance? And I'd say what I always said. I'm comfortable here. This is my home. Catherine would exchange a look with Margot. They'd have a quick conversation in French. Elle est têtue. Nous devrons la convaincre d'une autre manière. She's stubborn. We'll have to convince her another way. I kept my face neutral and changed the subject. But I started to worry. Not about myself, but about what they might be planning. So I did what any sensible person would do in my situation. I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Chen, and he came highly recommended by an old friend from my Paris days who now worked in corporate security. Marcus specialized in domestic investigations, and he spoke French fluently, having grown up bilingual with a French mother. I explained the situation to him, told him about the French conversations, the obsession with my house, my concern that something was being planned. I need to know what they're really saying, I told him. I need to know what they're planning. And I need proof. Marcus nodded. I can attend family gatherings as a caterer or delivery person. Small cameras and microphones in my uniform. They won't even notice me. And I'll record everything. Over the next 6 months, Marcus came to 4 family gatherings. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Maxwell's 9th birthday, Easter. Each time, he wore different uniforms, played different roles. The caterer bringing extra food. The florist delivering an arrangement. The handyman fixing a leak. Each time, he recorded hours of conversation. And what those recordings revealed made my blood run cold. Catherine wasn't just insulting me in French. She was planning to take everything from me. Her and Margot had worked out an entire scheme, discussing it in French right in front of me, confident I couldn't understand. At Thanksgiving, while I was in the kitchen carving the turkey, they sat in the dining room discussing what they called le plan. The plan. Catherine explained it to Margot in detail. James S. Accord. Sommaire déviant de plus en plus confuse, de plus en plus incapable de prendre soin d'elle-même. Nous avons documenté de incidents. James agrees. His mother is becoming more and more confused, more and more incapable of taking care of herself. We've documented incidents. What incidents? I wasn't confused. I wasn't incapable. But apparently Catherine had been telling James stories. That I'd forgotten appointments. That I'd called him by his father's name. That I'd seemed disoriented when she visited. All lies. All fabrications designed to paint a picture of cognitive decline. Nous avons rendezvous avec un avocat mardi prochain, Catherine continued. We have an appointment with a lawyer next Tuesday. ILSE specialise dans les tutelles pour les personnes âgées. Il dit que si nous avons accès de documentation médicale, nous pouvons faire déclarer Eleanor inapte et James peut devenir son tuteur. He specializes in guardianships for the elderly. He says if we have enough medical documentation, we can have Eleanor declared incompetent and James can become her guardian. My hands were shaking as I carved the turkey. They were planning to have me declared legally incompetent. To strip me of my rights to make my own decisions. To take control of my assets, my home, my life. Et après? Margot asked. And after that? Après, nous vendons la maison de ville. Elle vaut au moins huit millions. Nous plaquons Eleanor dans une maison de retraite, le moins cher que nous pouvons trouver, peut-être 3 000 par mois. Le reste de l'argent, nous l'investissons. James et moi achetons quelque chose de convenable à Manhattan. After that, we sell the brownstone. It's worth at least $8 million. We place Eleanor in a nursing home, the cheapest we can find, maybe $3,000 a month. The rest of the money, we invest. James and I buy something suitable in Manhattan. $3,000 a month. The cheapest nursing home they could find. They'd sell my $8 million home and warehouse me in some underfunded facility where I'd spend my final years warehoused with inadequate care, all so they could live in Manhattan. I brought the turkey into the dining room with a smile and asked who wanted white meat. The Christmas recording was even worse. Catherine and Margot discussed the lawyer meeting in detail. Apparently, they'd been advised to gather medical evidence. Le problème, Catherine explained, the problem is, Eleanor n'a pas vu de médecin depuis des années. Elle refuse d'y aller. Donc nous ne pouvons pas obtenir d'évaluation officielle de son déclin cognitif. Eleanor hasn't seen a doctor in years. She refuses to go. So we can't get an official evaluation of her cognitive decline. But they had a solution. Nous créons nos propres preuves, Catherine said. We create our own evidence. Des incidents que nous documentons. Des témoins que peuvent attester de sa confusion. EDSI nécessaire, nous trouvons un médecin que, pour les bons honoraires, fournira une évaluation conforme à nos besoins. Incidents that we document. Witnesses who can testify to her confusion. And if necessary, we find a doctor who, for the right fees, will provide an evaluation that meets our needs. They were planning to fabricate medical evidence. To pay off a doctor if they needed to. To build a completely false case that I was cognitively declining. James and Aesop Conrain? Margot asked. James doesn't suspect anything? Catherine laughed. James pense que nous faisons cela par inquiétude pour sa mère. Il pense que nous sommes de bonnes filles attentionnées. Il n'a aucune idée que nous faisons cela pour l'argent. James thinks we're doing this out of concern for his mother. He thinks we're good, caring daughters. He has no idea we're doing this for the money. I excused myself from the table and went to the bathroom where I quietly vomited, then washed my face and returned to serve dessert. By the time Marcus had finished his investigation, I had hours of recordings. Catherine and Margot discussing their plans in explicit detail. Their timeline, their strategies, their motivations. And I learned other things too. Marcus had done a full background check on Catherine. Her maiden name wasn't Beaumont as she claimed. It was Kowalski. Catherine Kowalski from Hoboken, New Jersey. Her mother wasn't from an old French family. She was Marie Kowalski from Quebec City who'd anglicized her name to Margot when she moved to the States. Catherine had studied French in college, yes, and spent 2 years in France, but as an au pair, not a student at the Sorbonne. She'd never studied at the Sorbonne. That was a complete fabrication. Her entire sophisticated French identity was a lie. A performance. She'd constructed this persona of being cultured and European and special, and she'd used it to manipulate James, to make herself seem more impressive than she was, to justify her constant criticism of everyone around her as being more refined. And she had massive debt. Marcus found evidence of $340,000 in credit card debt, personal loans, money borrowed from her mother. All spent on maintaining the illusion. The designer clothes, the expensive restaurants, the trips to France to visit family, which were really just tourist trips to keep up the pretense that she was connected to French high society. She was drowning financially. And my brownstone represented salvation. $8 million that could wipe out her debts and fund the lifestyle she wanted to maintain. I sat in my study for a long time after Marcus delivered his final report. I thought about confronting them immediately. I thought about calling the police. But I realized that what I wanted wasn't just to stop them. I wanted them to understand exactly who they'd been underestimating. I wanted them to experience the humiliation of having their scheme exposed in front of witnesses. I wanted justice, but I also wanted a reckoning. So I planned. Carefully. Meticulously. The way I used to plan gallery exhibitions back in Paris, thinking about every detail, every sight line, every moment of impact. I decided to wait for Maxwell's 10th birthday. Catherine and Margot always felt most confident at family celebrations, most free to speak French openly. I would let them feel secure, let them think victory was near. And then I would reveal everything in the most devastating way possible. I sent invitations for Maxwell's birthday dinner. Just family, I said. Just a small celebration at my house. Catherine responded immediately, eagerly. She probably thought this would be a perfect opportunity to pressure me again about moving, to document more incidents of confusion. But I sent 3 other invitations. To Pierre Dubois, Marie Laurent, and Claude Fontaine. Old friends from Paris, all of whom happened to be in New York that week for an art auction at Sotheby's. I'd stayed in touch with them over the years, occasional emails and phone calls, though I hadn't seen them in person since Richard's funeral. When I explained what I needed, they agreed immediately. The dinner was set for Saturday evening. I spent all of Friday cooking. Real French food, the kind I used to make in Paris. Coq au vin with pearl onions and bacon. Ratatouille made with vegetables from the farmer's market. French onion soup with real Gruyere melted on top of crusty bread. Tarte tatin for dessert. I wanted every detail to be perfect. Saturday arrived. James and Catherine came early with Maxwell. My grandson hugged me tight, excited about his birthday. He was such a sweet child, innocent of all the ugliness happening around him. I held him close and thought about how much I was about to destroy his family as he knew it. But it had to be done. He deserved to grow up knowing the truth about who his mother was. Catherine looked around the dining room, which I'd set with my good china and crystal. She said something to Margot in French about how I must be confused because this level of formality was inappropriate for a child's birthday. I smiled and offered them wine. As we were having cocktails, Catherine's sister Sophie arrived. I hadn't known she was coming, but apparently Catherine had invited her without asking. Sophie was younger, about 30, and she also spoke French, though not as fluently as Catherine. She greeted me warmly enough, but I saw her exchange a look with Catherine. 3 of them now. 3 people who could speak French freely while I supposedly remained oblivious. We sat down to dinner. I served the soup first. Catherine took 1 spoonful and made a comment in French to Margot. Elle a probablement acquis ca au supermarché. Les Américains n'ont aucune idée de la vraie cuisine française. She probably bought this at the supermarket. Americans have no idea about real French cooking. Margot laughed and agreed. C'est trop lourd, pas raffin. It's too heavy, not refined. I asked Maxwell about school and he told me excitedly about his science project. He was such a bright, curious child. James looked proud as Maxwell talked, but also distracted, glancing at Catherine every few minutes as if seeking her approval of his reactions. Then the doorbell rang. Oh, I said, standing up. That will be the other guests I mentioned. Some old friends who are in town. Catherine looked annoyed. Mother, we discussed this being just family. These people are like family to me, I replied. You'll enjoy meeting them. I opened the door and Pierre, Marie, and Claude stood there, all elegantly dressed, all smiling warmly. We exchanged the traditional French greeting, kisses on both cheeks, and they spoke to me in rapid French. Eleanor. C'est la fête si longtemps. Tu nous as tellement manqué. Eleanor. It's been so long. We've missed you so much. I responded in equally rapid French. Vous aussi, mes amis. Entrez, entrez. J'ai tellement de gens que j'ai vu que vous rencontrez. You too, my friends. Come in, come in. I have so many people I want you to meet. We walked into the dining room and I saw Catherine's face. She had frozen, her wine glass halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with confusion. She didn't understand. How did I know these people? How was I speaking French? James, Catherine, Sophie, Margot, I said in English, please let me introduce some dear friends from my years in Paris. Pierre Dubois, who is one of the most respected art dealers in Europe. Marie Laurent, who was director of the Musée d'Orsay when I knew her, and who is now on the board of several major museums. And Claude Fontaine, who has served as cultural attaché at the French Embassy in Washington. I turned to my French friends and switched back to French. Edie voici ma famille. Mon fils James, sa femme Catherine, sa sœur Sophie, Edie sa mère Margot. Je vous ai dit que Catherine parle aussi français. And this is my family. My son James, his wife Catherine, her sister Sophie, and her mother Margot. I told you that Catherine also speaks French. Pierre extended his hand to Catherine, speaking in beautifully accented English. How wonderful to meet another francophone in the family. Eleanor has told us so much about you. Catherine took his hand mutely. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Beside her, Margot had gone pale. James was staring at me. Mom, you speak French? I sat down at the head of the table and smiled at my son. Fluently, dear. I lived in Paris for 23 years, remember? I was a senior curator at 3 major galleries. Your father and I had an apartment on Rue de Rivoli. I thought you knew this. But you never said. You never asked, I replied gently. After your father died, I came back here to be close to you and Maxwell. I didn't see the need to parade my credentials. I'm just your mother. That's enough. Pierre, Marie, and Claude were taking their seats, accepting plates of soup, complimenting the food in French. They were playing their roles perfectly, treating this as a normal dinner with an old friend, not acknowledging the tension that was thick enough to cut with a knife. Catherine found her voice. You speak French, she said flatly. I do, I confirmed. I find it's useful to stay quiet sometimes though. You learn so much more when people think you don't understand them. She went even paler if that was possible. Margot made a small choking sound. I continued, still speaking English so James could understand. For example, I've learned over the past 2 years that you've been calling me a senile old bitch in French. Multiple times. At Thanksgiving, you called me la vieille salope senile. At Christmas, you discussed at length how I'm declining mentally and need to be institutionalized. At Easter, you explained to Sophie here about your plans to sell my house and put me in the cheapest nursing home you could find, for about $3,000 a month you said, so you and James could buy something suitable in Manhattan. James's face went white. What? Catherine, what is she talking about? Catherine's mouth opened and closed but no sound came out. I stood up and walked to my study, returning with a laptop. I have recordings, I said pleasantly. Would you like to hear them? They're quite detailed. Hours and hours of you and Margot discussing your plans in French, confident that the stupid American grandmother couldn't possibly understand. I opened the laptop and played a clip. Catherine's voice came through clearly, speaking French. La vieille salope senile pense encore qu'elle dirige les choses. The senile old bitch still thinks she's running things. James flinched like he'd been slapped. I played another clip. Catherine again, from Christmas. Nous vendons la maison de ville. Nous plaquons Eleanor dans une maison de retraite, la moins chère que nous pouvons trouver. We sell the brownstone. We place Eleanor in a nursing home, the cheapest we can find. And another. James pense que nous faisons cela par inquiétude pour sa mère. Il n'a aucune idée que nous faisons cela pour l'argent. James thinks we're doing this out of concern for his mother. He has no idea we're doing this for the money. I stopped the recording and looked at my son. His face had gone from white to red, his hands clenched into fists on the table. Tell me this isn't true, he said to Catherine. Tell me you didn't say these things about my mother. Catherine tried to salvage something. It's out of context. She's twisting everything. I was just concerned about her welfare. You called her a senile old bitch, James said, his voice shaking. You planned to institutionalize her in the cheapest place you could find so you could steal her house. How is there any context that makes that acceptable? She started crying, but they were angry tears, frustrated tears. You wanted sophistication, she screamed suddenly, switching to English, her carefully cultivated composure finally cracking. You wanted someone cultured and refined and European. I gave you that. I made myself into what you wanted. By lying about everything? James shot back. By plotting against my mother? I held up my hand. There's more you should know, James. About who your wife really is. I pulled out the private investigator's report. Her name isn't Catherine Beaumont. It's Catherine Kowalski. From Hoboken. Her mother isn't from an old French family. She's Marie Kowalski from Quebec City. Catherine never studied at the Sorbonne. She was an au pair in France for 2 years. Her entire sophisticated French identity is a fabrication. And she has $340,000 in debt from maintaining the lie. Designer clothes, expensive restaurants, trips to France. All of it on credit. All of it to keep up the illusion that she was something she's not. Margot stood up abruptly. We should go. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made her sit. I switched to French, looking directly at her. Asseyez-vous, Madame Kowalski de Quebec. Vous n'allez nulle part avant que j'aie fini. Sit down, Mrs. Kowalski from Quebec. You're not going anywhere until I'm finished. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected me to know about Quebec. I continued in French, still speaking to Margot. Votre accent vous a trahi dès le premier jour j'ai vivis à Paris quand vous n'étiez une petite fille au Québec. J'ai sais faire la différence entre le français parisien et le français québécois. Vous avez élevé votre fille pour qu'elle soit un mentus et un volius, et maintenant vous allez tous les deux en payer le prix. Your accent betrayed you from day one. I was living in Paris when you were just a little girl in Quebec. I know the difference between Parisian French and Quebec French. You raised your daughter to be a liar and a thief, and now you're both going to pay the price. Sophie, Catherine's sister, spoke up for the first time. I didn't know, she said quickly, about any of the planning. I just thought Catherine spoke French because she lived in France. I didn't know about the plots or the lies or any of it. I believed her. She looked genuinely shocked and horrified. You can go, I told her gently. This doesn't concern you. She left quickly, almost running from the house. I turned to James. You have a choice to make now. Your wife and her mother conspired to have me declared legally incompetent so they could steal my home and institutionalize me in substandard care. They fabricated evidence. They planned to falsify medical records. This is elder abuse. It's fraud. It's conspiracy. I can go to the police right now with these recordings and they will both face criminal charges. Or... I paused. You can divorce her. Immediately. She signs a confession to everything, which I keep in case I ever need it. She and her mother leave this state and never contact me or Maxwell again. She gets nothing in the divorce. And I don't press charges. Catherine started to protest, but I cut her off with a look. James sat there for a long time, his head in his hands. Finally he looked up. How could I have been so stupid? How did I not see what she was? You loved her, I said gently. Or you loved who you thought she was. People can be very good at pretending to be something they're not. Believe me, I know. I've been pretending to be a simple grandmother for years. He nodded slowly. Then looked at Catherine. We're done. Sign whatever my mother wants you to sign. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Catherine tried one more time. She turned to me and spoke in French. Vous avez gagné, vous vieille, you win, you old. I interrupted her, also in French. Fate's attention aux prochaines mots que sortent de votre bouche, Catherine. Je ne suis pas manipulatrice. Je parle couramment le français, say tout. Ilya indifference. E je ne suis pas vieux. J'ai de l'expérience. Maintenant sortez de ma maison. Au revoir. Be careful what words come out of your mouth next, Catherine. I'm not manipulative. I'm simply fluent in French, that's all. There's a difference. And I'm not old. I'm experienced. Now get out of my house. Goodbye. She and Margot left. Just walked out without another word. I would never see them again. After they were gone, Pierre, Marie, and Claude stayed for another hour, helping to normalize the situation, talking with James about what his mother had really been like in Paris, sharing stories that made him laugh and cry at the same time. They were kind to Maxwell, who didn't fully understand what had happened but knew something big and sad had occurred. When they finally left, with promises to visit again soon, James and I sat in the living room while Maxwell played with his birthday presents upstairs. I'm so sorry, Mom, James said. I almost let her destroy you. I believed her lies about you being confused, about you declining. I was willing to institutionalize my own mother because my wife convinced me it was the right thing to do. She was very convincing, I said. That's what con artists do. They find your vulnerabilities and exploit them. She knew you wanted a sophisticated wife, someone cultured, and she became that for you. And then she used that persona to manipulate you into believing her version of reality over your own experiences with me. But I should have questioned it, he insisted. I should have talked to you directly, asked you how you were feeling, instead of just believing her reports about your confusion. He was right, but I didn't say that. He was already beating himself up enough. What matters is what you do now, I told him. You have a son who needs his father. Focus on him. Focus on rebuilding your life. And maybe get some therapy to figure out why you were so eager to believe I was declining. He nodded. And Mom? Will you tell me about Paris? About who you really were? I want to know. I will, I promised. But not tonight. Tonight, go be with your son. He needs you. The months that followed were difficult but necessary. James filed for divorce. Catherine signed the confession without fighting, knowing the alternative was criminal charges. She and Margot left New York. I heard later they moved to Florida, far from anyone who might recognize them from the viral stories that had spread about the failed scheme. James went to therapy, working through how he'd been manipulated, how he'd almost betrayed his own mother. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. I started sharing stories about Paris, about my work, about the woman I'd been before I decided to become just grandma. And I started teaching. First just Maxwell, who asked me to teach him French. Real French, grandma. Like you speak. We'd have weekly lessons in my study, surrounded by the art from Paris that I'd finally unpacked and hung on the walls. Paintings I'd acquired decades ago that were now worth small fortunes. Then I started a French conversation class at the community center. For seniors, mostly. People who'd always wanted to learn but thought they were too old. I taught them that language is power, that learning is lifelong, that age is just a number. 6 months after that terrible birthday dinner, I had 15 students. A year later, 30. Many of them were elderly people who'd been dismissed by their families, underestimated, pushed aside. I taught them French, yes, but I also taught them something more important. That being underestimated can be a strategic advantage. That staying quiet and observing can tell you more than demanding attention. That knowledge, real knowledge, beats performance every time. Catherine thought speaking French made her superior. She thought it was a weapon she could use against an ignorant old American woman. What she didn't realize is that true sophistication isn't about where you're from or what language you speak or how many designer labels you wear. It's about character, integrity, respecting the people around you, and earning your accomplishments rather than fabricating them. She used French as a tool for deception and manipulation. I used it as a tool for protection and ultimately, for justice. The difference is, I actually earned my fluency through years of living, learning, working, and loving in a culture I genuinely respected. She bought hers from a college textbook in a 2-year au pair stint, then wielded it like a weapon against someone she thought couldn't defend herself. But I could defend myself. I just chose my moment carefully. I let her think she was winning right up until the moment I revealed she'd already lost. That's not manipulation. That's strategy. That's patience. That's the wisdom that comes with age and experience. My grandson Maxwell is 13 now. He speaks French beautifully, with the proper Parisian accent I taught him. We read French literature together. We watch French films. We cook French food. And I've told him everything about his mother, age-appropriately, because he deserves to know the truth. Not to make him hate her, but to teach him that people aren't always what they seem, that you should trust actions over words, and that family, real family, is built on honesty and respect. James has started dating again, carefully this time, with his eyes open to red flags. He asks me to meet anyone he's serious about early on. He wants my assessment. He trusts my judgment now in a way he didn't before. And me? I'm still in my brownstone. Still teaching French. Still volunteering at the museum where I occasionally consult on their impressionist collection, sharing knowledge I accumulated over decades. Still living the life I choose, on my terms, with my boundaries firmly in place. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic or loud or violent. Sometimes it's simply responding in perfect French when someone least expects it. Watching their face as they realize everything they thought they knew was wrong. Watching their carefully constructed house of lies collapse in the language they thought belonged only to them. Catherine tried to steal my home, my freedom, my dignity. Instead, she lost her marriage, her reputation, her carefully fabricated identity. She wanted to silence me, to make me invisible, to warehouse me away where I couldn't interfere with her plans. But I was never silent. I was just waiting. Listening. Learning. Gathering evidence. And when the moment was right, I spoke. In French. In English. In the language of truth and consequences. Je ne regrette rien. I regret nothing. Not the years of staying quiet. Not the moment of revelation. Not the destruction of my son's marriage or the exposure of Catherine's lies. Because sometimes love means protecting yourself from those who would harm you, even if they're family. Sometimes wisdom means knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. And sometimes justice means letting people destroy themselves with their own words, their own schemes, their own arrogance. I'm 71 years old. I speak 5 languages fluently. I have a doctorate in art history from the Sorbonne that I never mentioned because I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. I've lived in 3 countries and worked with some of the greatest artists and curators of the 20th century. I'm worth about $18 million, not that I advertise it. And I'm teaching a new generation that age isn't weakness, that quiet observation isn't ignorance, and that underestimating someone based on their appearance or their age or their willingness to stay silent is the biggest mistake you can make. Now, if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or dismissed or insulted in a language someone thought you didn't understand, click on the next video appearing on your screen. Because that story has a twist you absolutely won't see coming. And remember, the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. Not because they're planning harm, but because they're paying attention. And attention, real attention, is the most powerful weapon of all.